If someone had told me even a week earlier that the most humiliating moment of my life would take place under the glittering chandeliers of the Belmont Hotel's Grand Ballroom in New York City, I would have laughed and told them they were being dramatic. My life was stable, my career was thriving, and I had long since learned how to keep myself out of the stormy center of family drama. I wasn't the type to be blindsided anymore, but life has a way of testing the boundaries you think you've built. And that night, my boundaries were tested in front of 200 people. To understand why it hurt so much, you need to know the life I had built for myself. I wasn't born into wealth, not the kind my extended family liked to flaunt at cocktail parties, but I worked like a woman with something to prove. At 22, I started as an assistant in a small Charleston real estate office. Within 5 years, I had obtained my license, secured my clients, and developed a knack for selling historic homes to buyers willing to pay top dollar. By 31, I had saved enough for a down payment on a 3-story Victorian in Charleston's historic district, a cream-colored beauty with navy shutters, wraparound porch, and oak trees older than the state itself. It was mine. Every inch of it had been earned, from the polished hardwood floors to the clawfoot tub in the upstairs bathroom. The house was valued at about $1.2 million, and while my mortgage wasn't small, my 6-figure income made it manageable. More importantly, it was my sanctuary. A place that represented independence, and every late night I'd spent working instead of socializing. The invitation to my cousin Isabella's wedding had arrived months earlier. Thick cream cardstock, gold embossing, cursive that looked hand-painted. Isabella was marrying Thomas Carter, a corporate lawyer from Boston whose family connections stretched deep into old money circles. My family adored the pairing, not because Thomas seemed like a kind man, but because his last name carried weight in the kind of rooms they wanted to be invited into. I didn't know Thomas well. I had met him only twice at holiday gatherings, both times finding him polite but distracted, like he was always thinking about the next deal he needed to close. The wedding was to be a grand affair at the Belmont Hotel, a Manhattan landmark dripping in history, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of staff who glide rather than walk. My seat was marked at one of the tables near the back, close to a pillar but with a clear view of the head table. I told myself it was fine. I wasn't there to be in the spotlight. I was there to smile, clap at the right moments, and keep my head down. I flew in on the morning of the wedding, checking into my room on the 12th floor, overlooking the city skyline. I took my time getting ready, curling my hair into soft waves, applying makeup that was just a touch more dramatic than my usual look, and slipping into the emerald gown I'd bought weeks earlier. It had cost me $600, which was more than I typically spent on a dress, but it felt right for the occasion. It was a rich jewel tone that flattered my skin and made me feel elegant without trying too hard. I paired it with my favorite silver earrings and a black clutch. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I made my way down to the lobby, where the air was already electric with anticipation. The first hour was pleasant enough. I exchanged polite small talk with distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, accepted a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, and admired the floral arrangements. Towering displays of white roses and peonies that must have cost at least $25,000. The cake, displayed on a mirrored table in the corner, was a towering masterpiece of sugar and fondant, at least 5 tiers high and dusted with edible gold leaf. It looked too perfect to eat, but before the champagne could even be poured at the reception, my Aunt Margaret intercepted me near the coat check. Margaret was a master of the practiced smile, the kind that looked warm from a distance but always seemed tight up close. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "Olivia," she said, her tone soft but purposeful, "we've been talking, and we think we have a solution for something important." I frowned slightly, unsure where this was going. "A solution for what?" "For Isabella and Thomas," she replied as though it were obvious. "They're starting their life together, and they'll need a proper home. You have that big house down in Charleston, far too much for one person. It only makes sense for you to give it to them." At first, I laughed, certain she was joking. "You're asking me to give them my home?" I said, my voice rising in disbelief. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "It's what family does. You can always get yourself something smaller, something more manageable." It took a moment for her words to fully register. My home wasn't just a piece of property. It was the physical proof of my independence, the reward for years of hard work and sacrifices. I stared at her, trying to decide if this was some bizarre test of generosity. "That's not going to happen," I said finally, my voice firm. Margaret's smile faltered. Within minutes, the conversation spread like spilled wine. My Uncle William wandered over, his brows knit in mock concern, telling me it was a small price to pay for the happiness of family. My parents joined in, echoing sentiments about how we all make sacrifices for the next generation. And then, as if summoned by the collective guilt trip, Isabella herself appeared. She looked breathtaking in her gown, layers of lace and silk that probably cost more than my car. But the look in her eyes wasn't soft or grateful. It was calculating. "Olivia," she said sweetly, "I know you've been so fortunate in your career, and you've always been independent. But Thomas and I have plans. We want to start our family right away. That house of yours would be perfect for us." Something in me hardened. "Isabella, I'm happy for you, truly. But my home is mine. I worked for it." The answer is no. There was a pause, a collective intake of breath from those hovering nearby. Isabella's expression cooled, though her smile stayed in place. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, almost like a promise. From that moment on, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations I tried to join fell silent when I approached. Glances darted my way, some pitying, others cold. But I refused to let it ruin the night. Or at least, I told myself that as I walked back into the ballroom, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter surrounding me like a wall I couldn't quite penetrate. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Vows exchanged under a canopy of white blooms, a string quartet playing softly in the background, Thomas looking every bit the polished groom. I watched from my seat, keeping my expression neutral, clapping when appropriate, and telling myself I just had to get through a few more hours before I could retreat to my hotel room. But beneath the surface of the celebration, the tension lingered. I caught my parents watching me with thinly veiled disappointment, my aunt whispering in a cluster of women who kept glancing my way. Every so often, I felt the weight of Isabella's gaze from across the room, a reminder that this wasn't over. By the time the cocktail hour ended and we were ushered into the reception hall, I was ready to count the minutes until my exit. The tables glittered with crystal and gold, the band played soft jazz, and waiters moved with choreographed precision. But the warmth I had once associated with family gatherings was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was only a sharp edge in the air, a sense that I had violated some unspoken rule by refusing to give away what I had earned. I didn't know then just how far they were willing to take their resentment. I didn't know that before the night was over, my refusal would be turned into a public spectacle, or that it would spark a chain of events that would ripple far beyond the walls of that ballroom. All I knew in that moment was that I had drawn a line. And judging by the looks on their faces, they intended to erase it. If the ceremony had been a perfectly staged picture from a wedding magazine, the reception felt like stepping into a living painting. The Belmont Hotel's grand ballroom glowed under the warm light of its massive crystal chandeliers. Gold accents gleamed on every table, tall arrangements of roses stood like sculptures, and the polished parquet floor reflected it all like a mirror. A live jazz band played from a raised corner stage, their music soft and elegant, blending with the low hum of conversation. Waiters moved with flawless precision, silver trays balanced effortlessly in their gloved hands, each carrying rows of champagne flutes. I remember standing near my table as we were ushered in after the cocktail hour, looking around and thinking, maybe, just maybe, my earlier confrontation with Isabella and the others had been the worst of it. I told myself they wouldn't dare to push it further. Not here, not tonight. The ceremony had gone smoothly enough, and aside from the occasional cold glance from my Aunt Margaret, things seemed to have returned to their carefully curated, normal. I was wrong. After the first course was served, an artful display of seared scallops and baby greens, the toasts began. The maid of honor, Isabella's childhood best friend Lauren, took the microphone first. She delivered a sweet speech about how Isabella had been dreaming of this day since she was 8 years old, about how Thomas was the man who, finally, understood her worth. There was polite laughter, scattered applause, and clinking glasses. Then Thomas's best man followed with a well-practiced story from their law school days, ending with a heartfelt toast to a love built to last. And then Isabella stood. She rose from her seat at the head table, her $12,000 lace gown catching the light, making her look like something out of a bridal catalog. Her hair was perfectly pinned, her makeup flawless, her smile serene. She held the microphone with both hands, looking out over the sea of guests like a queen surveying her court. I didn't think much of it at first. Brides give speeches all the time. I even lifted my champagne flute in preparation, but her eyes found mine almost immediately. The serenity in her expression shifted. Not enough for the whole room to see, but enough for me to recognize. It was the same calculating glint I'd seen earlier, when she'd tried to convince me to hand over my home. The air seemed to change, the music fading into the background. "Some people in this room," she began, her voice clear and ringing in the grand space, "don't understand what family means." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. I felt my stomach tighten. "Some people," she continued, her gaze still locked on mine, "would rather hoard what they have than share with those they love. They forget that families sacrifice for each other, that we help each other build a future." The words hit like small, sharp stones. Each syllable was deliberate, designed to draw the attention of every person in that room toward me. I could feel the shift in the guests' focus, the subtle turning of heads, the narrowing of eyes as people began to guess who she was talking about. Before I could open my mouth to respond, she moved. Isabella stepped down from the head table, her heels clicking against the floor as she crossed the space between us. I remember the rustle of her gown as it brushed against the chairs, the faint scent of her expensive perfume reaching me before she did. She stopped in front of me, her face the picture of controlled anger, and then she slapped me. It wasn't a playful tap or an impulsive brush of the hand. It was sharp, deliberate, and loud enough to echo off the ballroom walls. My head jerked, slightly with the force of it, and for a moment I couldn't hear anything but the ringing in my ears. Gasps came first, startled intakes of breath from people nearby. But almost immediately after, there was laughter. Not everyone, but enough that the sound seemed to swell around me. Some were nervous laughs, others sharp and delighted, like they'd just witnessed the climax of a soap opera. The sting in my cheek burned hotter with every passing second. I looked around the room, searching for one, just one, familiar face that might show support. My parents sat frozen at their table, neither moving nor speaking. My Aunt Margaret looked smug. My so-called friends from Charleston avoided my gaze entirely. Not a single person stepped forward. That was the moment something in me shifted. I set my champagne glass down on the nearest table with deliberate care, as if the stemware were the most fragile thing in the room. I straightened my posture, pulling my shoulders back and forced my face into a calm I didn't entirely feel. The pain in my cheek was real, the humiliation sharper than I'd ever experienced, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. "You'll regret that," I said quietly. My voice was low enough that only those closest to us could hear, but the words were steady. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I simply told her the truth. Isabella tilted her chin upward, a smug smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I doubt it," she replied, before turning on her heel and walking back toward the head table, to a smattering of applause from a few guests, too caught up in the drama to realize the ugliness of what they'd just witnessed. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but certain moments are seared into my memory. The band resumed playing as if nothing had happened. Waiters continued to glide between tables, offering slices of that towering cake. Conversations resumed, though I could feel the weight of whispers following me wherever I moved. I could almost hear the words. "Did you see? Why would she? What did she do to deserve that?" At one point, a man I vaguely recognized from my cousin's side approached me near the bar. He was in his mid-40s, expensive suit, and had an expression that seemed half apology, half curiosity. "Tough night," he said. "But you know, family. We all make sacrifices." I didn't reply. I simply turned and walked away. Later, as I slipped out of the ballroom and into the quiet of the hotel's marble hallway, I caught my reflection in a gilded mirror. My cheek was faintly pink, my hair still perfectly in place, my dress as flawless as when I'd first put it on. But my eyes, they were different. They weren't shocked anymore. They were calculating. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I understood one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't going to end with me slinking away in shame. They had turned me into a spectacle, stripped me of dignity in front of 200 people, and expected me to disappear quietly. That wasn't going to happen. By the time I reached my hotel room, the pain in my cheek had dulled to a memory, but the determination in my chest had only grown sharper. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the scene replay in my mind. Every word, every laugh, every sideways glance. They thought they had humiliated me into silence. They were wrong. The next morning, I woke to a dull throb in my cheek and the faint hum of New York traffic outside my hotel window. At first, there was a strange, blissful second when I forgot where I was, when I could believe that the humiliation from the night before had just been a vivid nightmare. But then my phone buzzed again, and again. The sound was relentless, like a warning alarm I couldn't shut off. I reached for it on the nightstand, expecting a few sympathetic messages from friends back home. Instead, the lock screen was flooded with notifications, Instagram mentions, TikTok tags, Twitter DMs from strangers I'd never met. My heart sank as I clicked the first one and saw it, the video. It was shaky at first, filmed from somewhere across the ballroom, but there was no mistaking the moment. Isabella's white lace gown, the gleam of her perfect smile, and her hand arcing through the air and connecting with my face. The audio was sharp enough to catch the slap, the gasps, and, worst of all, the laughter that followed. The caption read, "When the family drama comes out at the wedding. Wedding slap, chew home grabber." By sunrise, it had already been shared over 30,000 times. By the time I finished watching, it had jumped to 32,000. The numbers were climbing like wildfire. For a long moment, I just sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, the faint scent of last night's perfume still clinging to my hair. I could feel the hot coil of humiliation in my stomach, the way my chest tightened as I scrolled through the comments. Who slaps someone at their wedding? She must have done something awful if the bride reacted like that. We need the backstory on this right now. Some people rushed to defend me, strangers who didn't even know my name but could sense there was more to the story. Others assumed the worst. And that's when I realized, if I didn't speak, they would fill in the blanks themselves. Isabella's version of events would take root, whispered into every sympathetic ear she could find. No, I wasn't going to give her that chance. I pushed the hotel curtains open, letting the gray winter light spill across the room. Then I sat at the small desk by the window, opened my laptop, and began to type. I started from the beginning. The conversation near the coat check, the demands for my home, the years of subtle manipulation and emotional bargaining from certain family members. I described how I had bought my house, the sacrifices I'd made to get it, and how quickly those sacrifices were dismissed as if my hard work didn't count. I included screenshots of the texts Isabella had sent in the months leading up to the wedding, hinting at how perfect my house would be for her and Thomas, and even one from my Aunt Margaret asking if I'd be willing to think of the bigger picture for the sake of family. Then I attached a screenshot of my most recent mortgage statement, proof that I was the one paying for every brick and shingle, that nothing had been handed to me. At the end, I wrote, "No one is entitled to the things you work for. Not even family. Especially not family who think they can humiliate you into giving them what they want." I read it 3 times, edited it once, and then hit post. Within an hour, it was everywhere. By midday, my phone was a constant vibration in my hand. Friends from Charleston texted me in disbelief. Clients I had worked with years ago sent messages of support. One even wrote, "If you ever want to sell that house, I'll be first in line, but don't you dare give it away." The video and my post were being shared by people with millions of followers. A lifestyle blogger reposted it with the caption, "Boundaries are beautiful." A financial advice influencer broke down the numbers of what giving away a $1.2 million home would cost me over a lifetime. Then, the news outlets picked it up. Local segments on New York morning shows ran the clip. A daytime talk show panel debated whether the slap was justified. One host called it tacky and desperate. Another said it was family business gone public. Even real estate. Blogs were weighing in, praising my refusal to cave to entitlement. It didn't take long for the internet to start digging. They found Isabella's Instagram, a carefully curated gallery of luxury vacations, designer handbags, and sponsored posts about skincare products she didn't pay for. They found Thomas's LinkedIn, which linked to the law firm where he worked. Then came the whispers. His firm had been accused of questionable dealings in a high-profile case just a year earlier. Screenshots of old news articles started circulating. By the end of the second day, Isabella had locked her social media accounts. By the third, she had deleted them entirely. The backlash against my family was faster and harsher than I expected. My Aunt Margaret's annual charity gala, set to take place at the end of the month, began losing sponsors one by one. Several local businesses pulled their support, citing negative public attention. The society pages, and which once fawned over her events, began speculating about whether the family's public image could recover. Thomas's law firm issued a short statement. "We are aware of the recent social media incident involving one of our associates and are reviewing the matter internally. According to one of my contacts in Boston, he had been placed on leave pending review. The same contact told me, with no small amount of satisfaction, that the partners were not thrilled to see their firm's name trending alongside a hashtag like jarred wedding slap. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that enjoyed watching the consequences unfold. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. The narrative had shifted. The comments online weren't asking what I'd done to deserve it anymore. They were calling Isabella's behavior exactly what it was: entitled, cruel, and self-destructive. On the fourth day, a producer from a major news network reached out to me. They wanted to interview me for a segment on family boundaries and financial independence. I agreed, but on one condition. I wouldn't mention my family members by name. I didn't need to. The story wasn't about them anymore. It was about standing firm when the people closest to you crossed the line. The interview aired the following week. I sat in my living room in Charleston for the filming, the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, and spoke clearly about the importance of saying no when you need to, about how family ties don't give anyone the right to take what you've earned. When the segment aired, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages poured in from people who had been in similar situations. Some who had given in and regretted it, others who had fought to keep what was theirs. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Chicago who wrote, "I wish I'd seen your story before I gave my brother my inheritance. I can't get it back, but I can set boundaries now. Thank you." That was when I realized the slap had become something much bigger than me. Of course, the silence from my family was deafening. My parents didn't call, not even to argue. My Aunt Margaret didn't send one of her passive-aggressive emails. Isabella and Thomas vanished entirely from my orbit, their absence so complete it was almost as if they'd never existed. Except for the small fact that every time I opened my front door and saw my house, I remembered exactly why I'd fought. To keep it. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew they weren't gone for good. Families like mine don't dissolve. They wait. They sulk. They bide their time until the next gathering or holiday forces us into the same room again. But if and when that day came, I would walk in with the same calm I'd had in that ballroom after the slap. Only now, I'd have millions of strangers who knew my side of the story. And the truth had a way of sticking. 2 months later, I sat on the wraparound porch of my Charleston home, a tall glass of iced tea sweating in my hand. The spring air was warm and heavy with the scent of magnolias, the kind of evening that made you slow down without realizing it. The chaos had finally settled, and for the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe without that low hum of anxiety in the background. My family had not spoken to me since the wedding incident. No calls, no emails, not even a snide comment through a mutual acquaintance. And instead of feeling the sting of isolation, I felt something far rarer. Peace. The house felt different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. I walked through its rooms each morning with an unshakable awareness that I had fought for this space. Not with fists or screaming matches, but by standing firm when it would have been easier to bend. The cream-colored siding gleamed in the late afternoon light. The navy shutters clicked softly in the breeze, and the old oak trees that shaded the property swayed like they were nodding in approval. This wasn't just a house anymore. It was my fortress. Financially, I was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. The viral attention from the slap had brought me high-profile clients who wanted to work with the realtor who stood her ground. They weren't just curious. They respected me before we'd even shaken hands. In March alone, I closed 3 major property deals totaling over $8 million in sales. My commissions from those deals were enough to cover an entire year's worth of mortgage payments, taxes, and then some. I used part of it to finally make a donation I'd been dreaming about for years, $25,000 to a local women's shelter that helps survivors of domestic and financial abuse. It felt poetic in a way to funnel the energy of what had been a humiliating public moment into something that would give other women a chance to rebuild. The practical wins were satisfying, but the deeper transformation was in my boundaries. Before all of this, I had been the type of person who avoided conflict at all costs. I would compromise to keep the peace, say it's fine when it wasn't, and quietly shoulder resentment rather than risk a scene. The slap, as ugly as it was, burned that habit right out of me. It forced me to confront how often I'd let others dictate what I owed them, simply because we shared blood. Now, the rules were different. If someone asked for something, I weighed it against my own needs, my peace. And if the answer was no, I said it without guilt. That shift extended beyond my family. I reevaluated friendships too. The people who had laughed that night or stayed silent when they could have stepped in quietly disappeared from my contact list. There was no dramatic announcement, no angry texts. I simply stopped reaching out. In their place, I invested more in relationships that felt mutual and supportive. My neighbor Ellen checked on my house whenever I traveled. My college friend Danielle, who had called me the morning after the slap and said, "You're the bravest person I know." These were the people worth keeping close. Work was busier than ever, but it didn't feel draining. I spent more time in my office upstairs, a bright corner room overlooking the garden, where light poured through tall windows and spilled across stacks of property folders. Clients came to me now, not just for my expertise, but because they trusted me to fight for their best interests the way I'd fought for my own. That trust made every deal more personal and more rewarding. The world, it seemed, had not forgotten the wedding. Every so often, someone would recognize me at the farmer's market or in line at the coffee shop. "You're the woman from the Belmont Hotel video, right?" they'd say, eyes wide with curiosity. I learned to smile and nod without letting it become my whole identity. Yes, that was me. Yes, I kept my house. And yes, life moved on. Beautifully. I hadn't heard from Isabella or Thomas directly, but through the grapevine, I learned enough to know their perfect facade had cracked. Thomas had quietly left his law firm, and rumors swirled about a settlement over an internal investigation. Isabella had taken a step back from the public eye, her once busy social calendar reduced to private dinners and trips that never made it to social media. Aunt Margaret's charity gala was still postponed indefinitely, and some of her former allies in the city's social circuit had stopped taking her calls. Actions have consequences, and they were living them. One sunny Saturday in April, I decided to host a small dinner on the porch for the people who had stood by me. Ellen brought a peach cobbler, Danielle arrived with a bottle of champagne, and a couple of my newer clients-turned-friends brought a bouquet of fresh lilies. We ate under strings of fairy lights, the sound of laughter mixing with the hum of crickets. At one point, Danielle raised her glass and said, "To Olivia, for showing us all what it means to choose yourself." It hit me then how different my life felt. The slap had been a public humiliation, but it had also been a public declaration, a moment where I could either shrink or stand tall. I had chosen to stand tall, and that choice had shifted the entire landscape of my life. I wasn't just keeping a house. I was keeping my self-respect, my independence, and my voice. Sometimes, on quiet evenings like this one, I still think back to that night at the Belmont Hotel. I can remember every detail. The glittering chandeliers, the cold shock of the champagne glass in my hand, the sharp sting across my cheek. But now, when I replay it in my mind, it isn't the slap itself that stands out. It's the way I straightened my shoulders afterward, the way I walked out of that ballroom knowing I wouldn't let it break me. That's the part I carry forward. Charleston has a way of healing you without you noticing. The cobblestone streets, the pastel-painted houses, the smell of salt water drifting in from the harbor. It's impossible to live here and not feel rooted. My morning walks through the neighborhood have become a ritual. I greet the same shopkeepers, wave to the kids biking to school, and watch the seasons shift in the gardens along the way. Every morning, I return to my front steps with the same quiet gratitude. I am here. I am home. In the weeks after the viral storm, a journalist asked me if I regretted posting my side of the story. I told her no, not because it hurt them, but because it saved me. Sharing what happened wasn't about revenge. It was about refusing to let someone else define the narrative. If I had stayed silent, the version of me they wanted to paint, selfish, greedy, cold, would have become the truth in the eyes of everyone who heard it. Speaking out didn't just protect my reputation, it protected my future. And now, my future feels wide open. A few days ago, I got an email from a real estate investor in London who had seen my interview months back. He wanted to partner on a cross-Atlantic luxury property venture. Charleston homes for European buyers, European estates for American clients. It was the kind of opportunity I wouldn't have dared to imagine before. I haven't said yes yet, but the fact that it's even on the table feels like proof that life can bloom from the most unlikely soil. As the evening deepened on the porch, the conversation turned to travel plans and summer projects. Ellen was talking about repainting her kitchen, Danielle was planning a trip to Maine, and someone asked me if I had any big plans of my own. I thought about it for a moment, swirling the ice in my glass. I think, I said slowly, I'm going to take a little more time to enjoy exactly what I have. The truth is, I don't need another big project right now. I don't need to chase something to prove my worth. I've already proven it, to the world, to my family, and most importantly, to myself. When the last guest left and the porch was quiet again, I stayed outside a little longer, watching the fireflies spark in the dark. Somewhere far off, a train horn blew, low and steady. I leaned back in my chair, my bare feet propped on the railing, and let the warm air settle around me. I kept my home. I kept my dignity. And I kept the knowledge that I would never again let anyone, family or otherwise, take from me what I had built. Sometimes the world forces you into a moment where you have to choose between what's easy and what's right for you. That night at the Belmont Hotel, I chose me, and I've never regretted it.